You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 173. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. What comes to mind for you when you think about kindness and leadership? Do you see kindness as something that enhances leadership? Maybe it's a bit of a superpower. Or do you see kindness as being soft, right? Maybe something that you wouldn't normally equate with leadership. Now, whatever it is that you currently think about kindness and leadership, I am thrilled that you've joined me here today. Thank you for joining. Welcome. Today's episode is all about leadership and kindness. And in particular, we're going to dive into 3 areas where I see lawyers get stuck. And we're also going to talk about what you can do instead. So excited to have you here. We're going to dive in. Now, first of all, why is it that we are talking about leadership and kindness for lawyers? The reason is this is something that comes up in my coaching practice, and it spans all ages of lawyers, right? From the super junior lawyers, students even, to more senior lawyers, right? At the beginning, maybe you're thinking about delegating to your assistant and you're having some reservations about that. And then as you build your team, right? The issues become a little bit more complex, right? You're trying to lead others. You've got a vision for your practice. And so at various stages, leadership can be made a little bit more difficult if kindness is something that you are holding on to, you're trying to live into, and you find that the two are at odds with each other. And so this is important because we need leaders. We absolutely need lawyers who are kind, right? If balancing kindness and leadership is a problem for you, that is a really good sign. We want you in a leadership position. We don't want our leaders to burn themselves out, and we need you to model your way of leadership. The reason I think this exists, based on what I've seen among the lawyers that I've worked with, is that I think a lot of lawyers will struggle with kindness and leadership. And it stems from a response to the way that they were led when they were more junior lawyers. I mean, maybe it even stems back to before your career as a lawyer. Maybe it's somebody who was an instructor at your school or university. Maybe it came from a relationship with your parents or somebody else who you consider to be an authority figure in your life. And so you've had this experience of being led in a way that was not kind. And you are trying so hard to make up for that you have kind of swung to the other end of the spectrum. And what I see among lawyers, right, if this is something that you struggle with, you might be able to relate to this, is that from a really well-intentioned place, you might find that you're spending too much time, right? If you're leading a team, maybe you're spending too much time managing. You may even find yourself micromanaging, even mentorship, right? There is, of course, a desired level of mentorship when you're helping to bring up younger, more junior lawyers. And yet there's also a threshold, right? Where you kind of get off balance. You might find that the more that you're investing your time, the more you're taken away from important tasks that you need to focus on, right? If you're leading your organization and you need time for those projects that are more in the nature of vision and planning for the future, and you're being interrupted in a sense with day-to-day tasks that you're getting involved in because others are seeking out your input, and you question whether it really needs to be you, whether you really need to be doing that, that can pull you away, and it can lead to resentment sometimes, and at an extreme level, it can also lead to burnout. You might also find that in an effort to be kind, you're avoiding addressing problem behaviors and work quality that maybe isn't up to standard, right? You might find that you're losing time, right? You're hoping that other people are going to catch on, that they're not going to make the same mistakes twice. Maybe they're going to read between the lines and they're going to figure things out. and maybe that isn't happening, you might also find that you're losing time fixing other people's mistakes or picking up the slack. And then finally, what you might find is that you're working so hard not to step on other people's toes, not to come across as too bossy. And what you might find there is that even though it's very well intentioned, you may be creating uncertainty and possibly even anxiety among your team because they don't know where they're going. They don't know what the expectations are. So, in other words, as a leader, you're brilliant, you're smart, you're well-intentioned, you're trying to lead with kindness, and yet you might find that you're exhausted because you're doing so much to support your team. You may feel like your team isn't improving the way that you want them to improve, or they're not developing as quickly as you would like them to. And you might find that they're relying on you to fix mistakes, to solve problems, and you might feel stifled, right? That you're not able to grow as a leader, that you're not able to grow your team because the job of being a leader keeps getting heavier and heavier. So if you can relate to any or all of these examples, you're not alone. I've spoken with so many lawyers, I've coached lawyers, so many of them who have struggled with this challenge, right? Of wanting to be kind and wanting to be a leader and struggling with how to do both and to do it well. And again, it stems often from this desire to be the type of leader or to not be the type of leader that you had when you were a more junior lawyer. And what I would offer to you today, and I'm so glad you're here for this podcast episode because I think it's really going to help you, is that it can be a question of reimagining what leadership looks like and finding a way to use kindness as a superpower in your ability to lead instead of letting it be a saboteur, something that holds you back. So today we're going to explore three common beliefs about kindness that may be standing in your way as a leader. And we're going to question those beliefs. We're going to poke some holes in them so that we can help you unlock the power that you have as a kind human, a kind leader, instead of letting that kindness be something that you find is holding you back. So diving into our first point, the first belief that you might have about kindness that may be holding you back is that kindness equals time spent. So what do I mean by that? That kindness is shown by spending a lot of time with people, right? Now, this makes perfect sense, right? I think we generally think it's good to spend time with people that we care about, including as a leader. And it may be a response, again, going back to this idea that sometimes we are trying so hard not to lead in a way that we didn't like being led. So you may have been led by an absentee lawyer or boss, and you may have felt really unsupported. So what might that have looked like? Well, in thinking of today's episode, vacations came to mind, right? I don't know if you've ever had that experience. I think most of us have, where somebody goes on vacation and leaves you with a list of files, sometimes with a little bit of, nothing's going to happen. These are all fine. And the minute they leave the office, something explodes and you're scrambling, trying to figure out how to deal with it. And that person is not reachable, right? They're on an airplane somewhere. Maybe that's different now with Wi-Fi. Maybe it's different. But you find that you're not able to connect with that person. And maybe they're not on vacation. They simply aren't available. And so sometimes for lawyers, you might feel like you've been thrown into the deep end. You've been tasked with figuring it out. It was hard. You didn't like it. You felt unsupported. It was scary. It was anxiety inducing, all of the things. And so as a result, you do not want to be that person to somebody else. So instead, in an attempt, in an effort, a genuine, heartfelt effort to do it better, you make yourself more available to the people that you lead, to your team. And it comes from such a good place. Now, this can become a challenge because you eventually will max out on time. So if you've got a really small team or the person or people that you're working with are relatively independent, you might find that offering your time is fine, right? There are no stumbling blocks. But at a certain point, what you might find is that you're maxing out on time, right? This time that you're devoting this individual attention is maxing out and you have reached a bottleneck. Things are not moving forward. You might feel like you can't focus on next level activities. So if you're trying to design a future or a vision for your organization, and it takes time to do that, and it's one of those important but not urgent things on your to-do list, if someone comes in with a problem and it needs to be dealt with immediately, you might be taking away from some of that other work that you would like to be doing in order to help them resolve the problem that they have on their desk. And maybe it's something that needs your attention, but maybe not. And when this continues to happen over time, what you might find is that you start to feel resentful and you might even feel burnt out, right? You don't see how you can possibly move forward when all of your time is consumed, whether it's working, managing, trying to create a vision for your organization, organizational tasks, paperwork, all of it. Now, the people that you lead may also be experiencing bottlenecks of their own if this is the leadership style that they have become accustomed to. What they might find is that they become dependent on you, right? They might come to you for the answer instead of trying to work through that answer for themselves. That might make it harder for them. It might make it slower for them to develop their own confidence when it comes to figuring things out and doing things on their own. It might stifle their growth when it comes to making decisions, and it might hold them back from becoming leaders more quickly themselves. So if this is something that you can relate to, right? If you find that you're a little bit at this bottleneck situation and you're spending a lot of time with your team, and what you would like to do is to pull back a little bit, I have some ideas for you. Now, one of those ideas is to, first of all, take a big step back and explore this question from a macro perspective. So in terms of leadership, you might ask yourself, what is most important for you to provide as a leader? So time, we've equated with kindness, right? So we might think that that is one of the components of leadership. And maybe that's something that you want to hold on to, but maybe put some boundaries around that. What else is important to you? Chances are support is important to you, trust, right? For you to be able to trust your team, for your team to be able to trust you, modeling leadership, right? If you've developed a leadership style as a reaction to not wanting to be a certain way, what is it that you are trying to model, right? What would be the benefit of you modeling that type of leadership for your team? It might be that being a good leader means modeling boundaries. What do healthy boundaries look like? It might also mean letting your team learn for themselves, even if it means that they're going to make mistakes, even if it means that you might be spending some time helping them clean up those mistakes. There's a wonderful expression, you've likely heard it, called benign neglect. And so this might be something that works for you as a tool in your toolkit when it comes to leadership. I know I love it as a parenting tool. I'm a pretty hands-on mother, and there are times when I opt for the benign neglect, and it's interesting how it works. So, for example, when the kids want their cereal in the morning, if I take a little bit too long to do it, guess what? Chances are they're going to go and do it themselves. Or if you're not planning the day for them, guess what? They might go ahead and plan the day for themselves. Now, this takes time, right? If you've got a 3-year-old, then maybe benign neglect is going to look a lot different from benign neglect when you've got a 12-year-old. But the idea here is that sometimes we think we need to do more as a leader because that's going to be more effective for our team to help others grow. And sometimes taking a step back is actually really good for them. And so if you think back to times when, again, maybe going back to that example where somebody leaves on vacation and it's super stressful, chances are you learned a lot by having to step up and figure things out. So as a leader, you might think about how you can balance this idea of being supportive and helping other people learn for themselves, but not being so far removed that they don't feel like they have the support that they need. So the idea there then is for you to think about, okay, how much time do you want to allocate to that formal leadership role that you have within your organization? So you might decide that there are certain times that you're going to make yourself available, right? Maybe you've got office hours every week. Maybe you schedule weekly meetings. I'm a huge fan, huge proponent of having weekly meetings, whether it's with your team, whether it's with your assistant, whether it's with a group of lawyers and staff maybe that are all working on a big project together. the beauty about having a designated time is that people know that they will have access to you, right? If something comes up on a Thursday and they know that you've got a meeting on a Tuesday and that you can talk about it then, great. If it's not urgent, they know it can wait and they can bring it up then. And guess what? Sometimes that problem that happened on a Thursday, by the time Tuesday rolls around, it's already been resolved. So by creating some pockets of time that are dedicated to meetings and that one-to-one individual attention, you have more control over it now, and your team knows, okay, this is when I can reach you. That's great. They can plan around that. Another thing you might think about doing is scaling your time, right? How can you get more bang for your buck when it comes to your time? And so a couple of ideas there might be meetings, right? If you are currently having a lot of individual meetings with people, you might notice that there are some trends, there are some patterns, there are some questions that come up regularly that would benefit from being in a group conversation. So maybe we go to that meeting model, right? Let's have a weekly meeting, or every 2 weeks we have a meeting to discuss some of these high level problems. And so everybody gets the benefit of hearing what you have to say on a particular topic or how to approach a certain type of problem. You might also scale by having others help you out. So as others in your organization become more senior, maybe they become people who you can delegate to. So some of the managing, some of the mentoring, you might find others within your organization who can do that for you. And when it comes to mentoring, when it comes to managing, sometimes that person who's in the leadership role there, they don't need to have a ton more experience than the person that they are managing or mentoring. They do need to have enough experience that they can help them, but they don't need to have as much experience as you, for example. Other things that you might do is to set expectations. So if people right now are accustomed to having access to you 24/7, you might need to think about the expectations that you're setting with them in terms of your availability. You might also want to set expectations in terms of what you're expecting them to do before they come and see you. I worked with a lawyer in my very first year of practice who did me a huge favor because he kept sending me away. I would go to talk to him about a file and he'd say, Paula, don't come back to me until you've done X, Y, and Z. And I love him for that because he taught me to take a problem, think it through, get as far as I possibly could. Sometimes the answer would be there and sometimes it wouldn't. But I learned how to do the work before turning to somebody else to ask them to help me solve it. So you might set that expectation with them. Sometimes the expectation might be a particular limit. I used to work for a client where problems that were of a certain dollar level were to be dealt with by the lawyer without the need for reporting. Anything above that required reporting. And so you might think about what things are on other people's plates where you give them autonomy to make decisions without needing to consult you, versus some decisions that you want to be a part of. So set those expectations and that will give everybody some clarity and it will free up some of your time. And then finally, probably the toughest thing to do when it comes to freeing up your time is to be willing to let go of control, right? The beautiful thing about people coming to you with their problems, people coming to you to talk about files, people coming to you for mentorship is that you know what's going on. And that's really great. You have control, you have information. So that helps you. But if we're in a situation where you're limited, right? You need more time. Part of that is going to require that you let go of control over how things are done and perhaps let go of control over how much information is coming to you. So those are some things that you might think about implementing if what your challenge is right now is that you're maxed out on time and you need to make yourself a little bit less accessible. And that comes from the belief that kindness is time spent. So the second belief that we're going to talk about today when it comes to kindness is the belief that kindness is not critical. So again, this comes very likely from having worked with somebody or been parented by somebody or been instructed by somebody who was not kind in the way that they spoke to you or to somebody that you know. Maybe they were really hypercritical. Maybe they used language that was unacceptable language. Maybe they used harsh words. Maybe they were very direct. Maybe they didn't soften any blows or hold any punches. And I mean, it could be any type of experience, or maybe you worked with somebody who was really kind and they spoke so kindly to everybody and you're trying to emulate that. Whatever it is that is at the root of this belief that kindness is not critical, sometimes it can become a problem, because if we have equated kindness with not being critical, or put another way, maybe we're equating kindness with telling people what we think it is that they want to hear so that we don't upset them, this can lead to a number of problems when it comes to being a leader. Now, from your perspective, you might find that you end up feeling trapped, right? So if you're avoiding telling people the truth as far as you see it, right? If you're shying away from delivering feedback, constructive feedback, then you might find that you're not getting what you need, right? If you need more support, but you're not telling people that you need more support, right? Maybe you need help sometimes on the weekends or in the evenings, or on files that other people don't really want to work on, or types of jobs that maybe you don't particularly like and you don't really want to impose them on others. So if you need more support, you may need to communicate that. It might be the quality of the work product, right? You might find that you're receiving a work product that isn't usable, right? It's not where it needs to be. You end up redoing other people's work because it's not where you need to be. And you don't want to give them the feedback that would potentially tell them what is deficient in the work product, because you don't want to hurt their feelings. So what you might find is that you become increasingly frustrated as a leader because people aren't performing to the standard that you need. They might not be as responsive as you want. So for example, if you've got an expectation that when you send an email, you'll receive a response within 2 hours or half a day or 1 day or whatever it is, and you're not getting the responses that you need, you may need to be really direct about the timing, the responsiveness that you require. But maybe you don't want to say that because, again, you're afraid of giving that feedback. So you might be increasingly frustrated. You might find that you end up picking up the slack. You're doing other people's work. And this can cost you, right? It can cost you in terms of your time, in terms of the way that you feel as a leader, right? Instead of feeling good and feeling confident and feeling like you're moving forward as a team, as a leader, you might just feel frustrated. You might feel a little bit stuck. You might feel resentful. And again, if this really goes on over a period of time, it can also lead to burnout. Now, interestingly, even though the goal here, or the reason that you're not wanting to give the feedback, is because you're trying to avoid hurting people, right? You're trying to be kind. You're trying to avoid hurt feelings. You're trying to avoid conflict. What you might find is that the people that you lead are also missing out. They may be missing out on direct, honest, and consistent feedback. This is something that we hear often in law firms, that there isn't enough feedback going to the lawyers, going to the students, going to the associates. They may sense that something is not right, but they don't know what the problem is. And I've seen this a number of times in organizations where management is really well-meaning. They really want somebody to succeed, and they have had conversations with this person, and they think that they have been clear about what the problem is. But because they didn't want to be too direct, because they didn't want to say something that might hurt them, they haven't told them exactly what it is that they need. And, it's almost like the person who's receiving the feedback would need to be able to decode what management is saying in order to understand what the problem is. And the image that comes to mind, the thought that comes to mind for me, is in war times, right? Where scrambled messages would be sent across the wires, and they were scrambled so that nobody else could figure them out. And you needed a special decoding device in order to uncode or to solve the mystery of what was being transmitted, right? You're trying to keep your location private or secret from enemies or whatever it is. So you can imagine if you're giving feedback to somebody and you have encoded it so much that the message no longer makes sense to the other person, or there's a message that makes sense, but it doesn't convey what you're actually trying to say, that person really doesn't stand a chance, right? There is no way they can fix something that they don't even know is a problem. And I see this happen, and I know it's well-intentioned, but for that person who is at the receiving end of the feedback, they know something is off, but they don't know what to do, and that can be really unsettling. And again, I know this because clients who come to me, right? I've seen it from management perspective, right? Where they're trying to help their lawyers and they really want to. They come from such a good place, but the messaging isn't clear. And sometimes it's when lawyers come to me and, I'll have an intake process with them where one of the questions I ask them is, what do you want from me as your coach? And so often what they tell me that they want from me is for me to point out their blind spots. People come to me and they want me to tell them what I think they're doing wrong because they know something is off, but nobody has told them what it is, right? It's a little bit like if you have spinach in your teeth, or you're walking around and your zipper's undone and you want somebody to pull you to the side and say, hey, listen, just so you know, this is what's happening. People really want to know that. So again, kind of going back to this idea that kindness is not being critical, sometimes people really need to hear some feedback that is going to be difficult to hear. So what can you do here? Number one is, I think, to take a big step back, right? We want to look at this from a macro perspective and ask ourselves who we even need to be critical or deliver hard feedback to. Because there will be a lot of relationships where you're in a leadership position, even with maybe it's a contractor that you've retained to help you with something, and you want to evaluate when and where you are going to give the gift of feedback. And if you ask me, I think delivering constructive feedback, when it's done from a good place, when it's done in service, when it's done for the purpose of improving a work product or helping you develop your skills, I think it is a gift, right? When I look back on my years as an associate, when I had lawyers who would take the time to take a red pen to something I'd written and then come and give me the feedback about why they made the changes that they made, to me, that was the biggest gift because I was learning how to make a better product, at least from that person's perspective, someone who had more experience than me, someone who was successful as a lawyer. When they were showing me things that I could improve on, I considered that to be a gift. So you might consider the feedback that you have to be a gift, and you want to decide who you give that gift to. So, for example, if you've got a contractor, let's say it's a courier service that you've been using and they haven't been very reliable lately, you might find that you're getting a bit anxious over whether things are getting delivered on time. Then you might ask yourself, is this a relationship where I want to give the feedback? Do I want to give them the benefit of a second chance? Or do I simply want to find a different contractor, right? A different courier service that I can use, right? On the other end of the spectrum, you might find that there are people within your organization, members of your team, people with whom you would like to cultivate a long-term relationship, people whose growth you want to help foster, people whose skills you want to help develop. For those people, they may be the ones that you're willing to invest your time and energy to give the gift of feedback to. So, big step back, first of all, is wanting to decide when you want to give feedback and when you are going to choose not to give that feedback, simply to find somebody else. And if it is a long-term relationship, then I want to invite you to think about how delivering direct feedback can help develop that relationship that you have with the person, help them understand what the expectations are, help to model and create an environment where it is safe for feedback to be delivered, and to have conversations where you can help people understand what expectations are and to also meet those expectations. And this may require a mindset shift for you. And there's a wonderful book. It's called Radical Candor. It's written by Kim Scott. And one of the main points of this book is that sometimes giving that direct feedback is the kindest thing that you can do for somebody, right? You can imagine if you're working with somebody and they continue to make the same mistake and nobody tells them what that mistake is, they aren't going to succeed within the organization. Whereas you could go and tell them, here's the thing that isn't working, give them an opportunity to fix it, and then they can move on and move forward. So you might need to have a mindset shift where you start to see that feedback as something that is kind. I've already told you that I view markups, right? I view feedback as being a gift. Again, you'd want to think about how you're delivering it, which kind of brings us to the last point that I have to make here, which is when it comes to implementing. So let's say you decide that giving direct feedback is something that you want to do, right? You want to incorporate this more into your leadership style and you want to do it from a place of kindness. I have some suggestions on how you can go about doing it. Now, first of all, is I do think directness, being direct, helps, right? We don't want the person at the other end of the feedback to need to decode it, right? The clearer you can be, the better. If there's an email where you thought the tone of the email was too abrupt, you may even refer to that email and show them, here's where it read a little bit abrupt to me. When I read emails, I always, think about the negativity bias, right? I've heard of a study, it was a few years back, where people read emails with a negative bias. And so if you're writing an email, you might think about how that comes across to the other person. I know for myself, I will often jump straight into an email. I will be very direct, and then I will go back before I send my email. I'll read it. And if I haven't said something nice, if I haven't done some sort of an introduction, I will add it in, right? Unless it's a thread and it doesn't make sense to add anything like that. But if it makes sense in the context, I will soften up the email because I know that I have a tendency to jump straight in. And I also know that people have a tendency to read emails with a negative bias. So if you have somebody that you're mentoring, somebody that you are managing, and they've got an abrupt speaking style and you want to help them improve that, take them to an example, show them what you mean. And it'll be so much easier for them to then understand what to do the next time they're writing an email. And of course, your email then translates into your spoken communication and your other interactions. So just learning piece by piece how to do things. When you show people what to do, when you show them where the problem is, it's so much easier for them to solve it. This also means having courageous conversations. And I would invite you to be thoughtful and intentional and plan out your conversations in advance. There are a number of resources in this podcast series about having courageous conversations. So I would refer you to go back to those. You can search the word courageous and conversations. You'll find them. And what I would invite you to do here is to think about how you want to approach the conversation. Think about the energy you want to bring. Think about the relationship you have with this person. Some of the best advice I ever heard about mentoring came from a woman, a lawyer who was working in an organization. She'd received multiple awards for her mentoring skills. And when I asked her about it, she said that her secret to being a great mentor was that when she went into difficult conversations, she always went in with the end in mind. And the end in her mind was preserving that relationship. So when you go in for your difficult conversation, I invite you to think about the long-term relationship and how you are there to support that person. Another strategy along those same lines is to wait until you feel calm. If you are upset by something, or even if there's close proximity in time, right? I don't think we need to give feedback on the spot. I think if you're training dogs, I've never had a dog, but I have heard that if you're training a dog, you need to deliver a consequence immediately. And with toddlers, the same is probably also true. You probably want to incorporate the lesson as close in time as possible because they will not understand, they will forget. But if you are a grown-up lawyer dealing with other grown-up lawyers or other grown-up professionals who are in your organization, you do not need to give feedback immediately in the moment. And I would encourage you to give it a bit of space because your perspective is going to change and chances are you're going to deliver the feedback more effectively and more kindly. So when you do finally decide that it is time to deliver that feedback, I would offer a very simple 3-step approach to doing it. Number 1, I would start with the positive, right? You've possibly heard of the feedback sandwich, and this is kind of like a feedback sandwich. The sandwich idea is you go positive, negative, positive. So we are certainly going to start with the positive because we want to acknowledge that the people that you're working with, your team, they're amazing, right? They're smart, they're hardworking, they are there to serve. If they're not, that's a whole other problem. But most of the time, people have good intentions. And so we want to acknowledge what they're doing well. So you start out on a positive, and then you're going to talk about the things that need improvement, right? Here are the things that aren't working. And when you're speaking about the feedback, you might use a lot of I statements like, I noticed that, I feel that, here's where you lost me, here's where I stopped following the thread, here's where I noticed that. So you want to use some I statements there because it takes away from this idea that, sometimes we use blanket statements like this didn't make sense. This didn't make sense to me. Makes it a little bit softer, personalizes it a little bit. And so you just want to keep that in mind. So you start out, you give that positive feedback, you give the constructive, what it is that in your view needs to be modified, improved, developed. And then at the end, you might think of more positive things to say, but what I would recommend here in particular is how you're going to move forward, right? And this can be a conversation, a dialogue. Here's the challenge. Here's what I'd like to see moving forward. How can we do this together? How are you going to do this? How can I support you? What do you think? So invite them to help you formulate next steps, but that will help to bring the feedback from a conversation about something that has already happened into feedback that you're able to apply going forward. One final note about feedback, because I don't think that I can have a conversation about feedback without bringing up the point that feedback is inherently subjective. There is a wonderful article written by the Harvard Business Review. I refer to it all the time. I think it's called The Feedback Fallacy, and I think it's one of the best articles I've ever read, frankly. And they talk about how feedback is inherently biased. And we know this intuitively, right? You might go out with people to a restaurant and everybody will tip based on who they are, right? Same server, same service, but people might have a different way of tipping. And it's based on who we are, right? It's inherent to our beliefs about tips and value and all that. So when you receive feedback from somebody, it is their inherently biased feedback. Apparently, the bias is not something that we can train ourselves out of, and that is okay, right? We just want to know that it doesn't render feedback meaningless. If your boss, the person that you report to, has feedback for you, their feedback really matters, whether they are the only person in the world to think the way that they think. But the idea here is that as a person giving feedback, just recognize there is a bias in your feedback, and that is okay. The idea, right, when we're giving constructive feedback is to help that person thrive in your organization. And if your views are that the feedback that you're delivering is going to help them, then it's worth giving that feedback. Okay, now we can move on to point number 3. This is the belief that kindness is not being an authority. Now, this has come up numerous times. I have a group coaching program for women lawyers, and in one of the months, it's a 6-month program. I love it. I love the women who have come through the program. I'm doing a group right now. I have a group of women lawyers that I'm working with. They are amazing. And in a couple of months, we're going to be doing a month based on confidence, authority, and power. Authority is one of those things that as a lawyer, I think we sometimes do not step into our full authority. We may be reluctant to assume authority. And one of the biggest reasons is because we're trying not to be authoritarian. So why do people not want to be an authority as a leader? Why do we equate kindness with not being an authority? I think there's a lot of reasons for this. I think for some of us, we have a bit of an allergic reaction, or we think of hierarchy as being something that has been constraining. We may have been in hierarchical organizations that we didn't like. Again, kind of going back to that idea that sometimes we want to lead differently than the way that we were led. And so if something didn't sit well with us because of the way it was being done, we do not want to replicate that in our organizations. And so we avoid it. So maybe that was part of it. Maybe we equate authority with authoritarianism, right? Authoritarianism being the idea of you set the rules and everybody else must comply. They must obey. And that might not sit well with you. You might equate authority with inequality or unfairness. And so instead of embracing authority as something that forms part of your leadership style, you might swing to the other end of the spectrum. You might give up your authority. You might not assume your authority. You may find that you're not asking for what you need because you don't want to impose your authority on others. You might find then that there are situations where you're doing the work instead of your team doing the work. Again, you might be finding that you're redoing people's work, right? You're afraid to give that feedback and you're doing the work yourself instead. Now, this doesn't work because from your perspective, you don't get what you need, right? If you are not stepping into authority as a leader, then what you might find is that you're not communicating clearly because you're afraid to ask for what you need. You're afraid to come across as bossy. You might find that you're bending yourself into a pretzel in order to accommodate everybody. And as a result, you feel exhausted. You might feel guilty asking for help. And instead of asking others to help you do things that you genuinely need help with, but maybe you feel a bit badly asking, like working evenings, working the weekend, taking on projects that are not the the best projects, or working on a file that's really messy or complicated, or the client is not happy, or whatever it happens to be. And instead you're doing that. You're picking up the slack. You're working the weekends. And so you might find that it becomes unsustainable for you. And interestingly, for the people that you lead, they may not appreciate, or they may not be enjoying the experience either. They might feel really confused, right? They may not know what is expected of them. They might feel anxious because they are not clear on who is in control. And if you have ever had a toddler, right? If you're a parent, or if you've ever babysat a toddler, you might think to yourself, right? I mean, when our kids were younger, it's a little bit easier now, but when they were younger in particular, the weekdays were pretty structured, and then weekends were kind of like this free-for-all. And you might think to yourself, ooh, like a whole Saturday with nothing to do. Sounds amazing. And it was before I had children, but a whole Saturday with nothing to do when you've got young children, if you've ever had this experience, then it's crazy. It's mayhem. It's something that you want to avoid at all costs, because the kids start to go crazy because there isn't any structure. They need to know what's happening. They need to have a routine in place. Some people are wired where they crave routine. I know I love routine. I want predictability. I want to do the same things over and over and over again. I like to have that structure in place. So when I'm being led, I like to know that I'm being led by somebody who has an idea of what we're doing, where there's some parameters around what the expectations are. I've had that experience occasionally in my legal career where I didn't have a billable target, and I did not like it at all, because yes, on the one hand, there's that freedom and flexibility of no target. But to me, it just spelled uncertainty. I didn't know what the expectations were. And so it was really hard to meet them. So when you're thinking about yourself as a leader, setting expectations, being an authority, it may actually be that this idea of not being an authority because you see it as being more kind isn't necessarily having the effect that you want it to have. So what can you do instead? Here, what I'd like to offer is it's a parenting model that I think is really useful when it comes to authority. It comes from a woman named Barbara Coloroso. She wrote a book called Our Kids Are Worth It, among other books. She's a fairly well-known parenting expert, actually. And she talks about these 3 different parenting styles: the brick wall, the jellyfish, and the backbone. These are all different styles, and I'll explain them a little bit more. So starting with the brick wall, this is what she describes as the authoritarian parenting style. So the way that she describes that is that the parents require absolute obedience from their children. Now, you may have been raised by parents like this. If you were, it may also inform your leadership style and your parenting style, right? If that's what you're used to and you didn't like it, maybe you've gone in the opposite direction. So parents are in control. There's no discussion. Children fear being punished, right? In this environment, there's a lot of fear that is motivating the children. And she talks about an emotional distance between the parents and the children. So if we translate this into leadership style, if you think about lawyers that you've worked with, where they may have had this brick wall or authoritarian leadership style, you might relate to some of that, right? That requirement that it be their way or it's wrong. There's no discussion. It's my way or the highway. There might be a lot of fear in that type of environment that you're going to get it wrong, that you're going to get in trouble. And emotional distance, well, there just is no emotional anything, right? It's just you do the work and you do it well, you do it correctly, or else. So that is one end of the spectrum. And if kindness is one of your motivators and you're working really hard to build that into your leadership style, you might be working in opposition to having had that experience of the brick wall. So if you go to the other end of the spectrum, that's where you get into a permissive parenting style. This is what Barbara calls the jellyfish, right? And this is where there are no rules, right? The children get to do whatever they want. They get confused, right? They feel like nobody actually cares. And as a result, they start to feel insecure. So again, if we take this jellyfish model and we think about leadership, right? When we are not stepping into our authority as leaders, where we're trying to keep the rules really flexible and yeah, you can do whatever you want. That's great. People get confused, right? They wonder, like, does anybody care? Like, are there boundaries here, right? I know when I've had situations where the boundaries aren't clear, I just get confused. This is one of the reasons why children apparently will test, right? They'll do things because they're trying to find out where the boundaries are. They want to see that the boundaries exist. And if you've parented ever, you've probably had that experience where you find that children act up, and when the boundaries become clear, then they can relax. And so you can think about this as a leader. When you put those parameters in place, right, you're creating certainty, you're creating a container, you're creating safety for people. So what we're ultimately aspiring to as parents and as leaders is this idea of authoritative or backbone, right? And in this model, parents, they care, they set rules, they enforce consequences. Children are involved in the decision making, right? They get to have a say, but, and this is really important, but parents are the final authority. So if you're thinking about this in your organization, you may solicit input from the team that you're leading. At the end of the day, you have the final authority. Now, in this model, parents change the rules as the children become more responsible. So you might think about that lawyer you're mentoring, right? And the rules will change as that lawyer gets more skills under their belt, more experience under their belt. The rules are going to change, right? The amount of leeway they have, the amount of discretion they have, all of that is going to change. This is a moving target. It also, in this model, ends up with this idea that the parents teach children how to think, not what to think, right? So going back to you as a leader, wouldn't you so much prefer to have a result where your team has been taught, they have learned how to think, not what to think? So again, if you've got lawyers who are coming to you and they need your help figuring out maybe sometimes really basic problems, your goal as a leader might become, how do I show up as an authority and teach them to think for themselves so that they are able to figure this out? So that really is the summary, or that is, what I have to offer in terms of the 3 different beliefs that may be holding you back when it comes to that struggle between being kind and being a leader. So just to briefly recap, we talked about this idea that kindness equals time spent with somebody and how we can step away from that belief and in fact foster more independence on the part of our team, the lawyers that we work with, by taking a step back, by making time, yes, one of the variables that we offer as a leader, but one of many variables that we offer. The second belief is kindness is saying only what people want to hear. And we have also dispelled that myth, right? That is simply not necessarily true, right? That sometimes people will benefit from hearing the difficult feedback, that they want to hear the difficult feedback because it will help them learn, it will help them grow, it will help them succeed, that it is actually kind to say the hard things. And then third, we talked about kindness as not being an authority, and we've dispelled that myth as well, right? This idea that being an authority can actually be kind, right? We may not want to venture into the territory of the brick wall, but we also don't want to go so far in the opposite direction that we have become the jellyfish. What we're looking for is the backbone. And one thing that I meant to mention, when we were talking about backbone, we were talking about the jellyfish, is I would invite you to think about where you fall on that spectrum, right? Whether you fall closer to a brick wall or to a jellyfish, or maybe you're already at a backbone. But where are you on that spectrum? And what might you do as a leader to step into the level of authority that you see as desirable for you to be a leader? And from that place, right? From leading with authority, I would invite you to think about how you are going to ask for what you need, how you're going to invite feedback, how you're going to deliver feedback, how you're going to follow through with consequences where you need to have consequences. So that will be your job, right? Your job as a leader is to think about these concepts, think about how they apply to you, create in your mind's eye or write it out on a piece of paper, the leader you want to be, the style you want to have as a leader, how you want to reconcile kindness and leadership, and to go about setting that recipe for yourself to follow. Now, when you do this, right? When you decide to take steps in alignment with what we've talked about here today, you can expect that you are going to feel uncomfortable. That is perfectly normal. It is to be anticipated because This may be a new set of skills for you. If you have been leading from a place of trying to protect people, trying to insulate them from difficult feedback, trying to avoid conflict or hurt feelings, and you go from that to asking for what you need using direct communication, if you start having more difficult conversations, if you start holding people accountable where maybe you weren't holding them accountable before, this is going to feel really uncomfortable for you. And some of the skills that you'll need then, I've got 3 different beliefs here. Number 1 is the belief in yourself. Belief in yourself as a leader, and that you as a leader are smart, you're strong, you're capable, you are well-intentioned, and you are doing the right thing. This doesn't mean that you're going to be perfect. My guess is that you're going to make mistakes because you're human and humans make mistakes. But I would invite you to believe in yourself as a leader, that we need leaders just like you. We need leaders who are trying to balance kindness with leadership. We need you. We need you to lead today, and we need you as models for our future leaders. So number 1, you need to believe in yourself. Number 2, you need to believe in the people that you are leading. You need to believe in your team. You need to believe that they are capable of learning, that they are capable of figuring things out for themselves, that they will adapt, that they will grow, that they want to adapt, that they want to grow, and that they can be held accountable. So that's number 2, is you want to believe in your people. And finally, you need to believe that leading in this way is what is best. It's what's best for your team. It's what is best for your clients. It is what is best for your organization. I mean, certainly if your organization and its sustainability and growth depend on you making these shifts so that you can free up some of your time, so that you can ask for what you need, so that your team can grow and evolve and learn from feedback. So this all is required, your belief that this is what's best for the organization and that this is what is best for you, right? To be this leader, right? This is what is best for you as well. And what you'll discover then is that people will rise to the occasion, and you'll see that the people around you, they become problem solvers, right? You might be surprised at what other people are willing to take on. I've had this experience with clients that I've worked with who set expectations, right? Where they decide that they're going to have to sacrifice this persona or this desire to be kind by asking for what they need. And when they go and they do that and they report back, they're so happy that they had these conversations, these difficult conversations that turned out to be really well received. They asked for help on projects, and then they had a team, and everybody was able to then move forward with particular projects where you set the expectations of what you need in terms of responsiveness, and then people started to respond. So this is part of what you'll experience then. So people around you, they will rise to the occasion. People will learn to receive and respond to feedback, right? If you start creating a culture where people are used to feedback, they get used to receiving feedback, they then learn how to give feedback, and they're learning it from you. You are modeling it for them. They also get to see, as I just alluded to, a model of leadership that is kind, that they then can follow. So if you think about all the leaders that you've had, maybe some of them already are leaders that you do want to emulate. They were kind, they were effective, they were strong leaders. And maybe they're those leaders where you think, this is just not what I want to represent as a leader. They were unfair, they had unrealistic expectations, they were unavailable. So you get to decide what kind of leadership you want to embody, what you want to model, and you've now served as a model for that next generation of leaders. And you will feel more confident as a leader. You will start to see the congruency. So instead of seeing the conflict between kindness and leadership, you'll start to see where the two are congruent. You'll see how an approach that comes from kindness can help enhance accountability. It can help you be more direct in your communication, and it can help you ask for exactly what it is that you need. And all of that in turn allows your team to do that for you. When you see that there is alignment between kindness and leadership, you might feel less of that internal conflict, that hesitancy to move forward and to ask for what you need. You might feel less doubt, and you might question yourself less. And as you start building a more productive and effective team because you're relinquishing control, you're allowing others to take more responsibility, you're allowing them to flourish and to grow themselves, you might find that you're able to move forward with some of those projects that have been stalling. You're able to lead at an even higher level. So this, my friend, is what I have for you this week. I hope that this has resonated with you. If you've ever struggled with balancing kindness and leadership, that you've got some takeaways that you can apply in your day-to-day. And if you'd like support, if you are thinking, you know what, this is a really interesting concept, I'd love some help with my leadership and putting these ideas into practice, feel free to reach out to me, send me a direct message, send me an email, reach out to me through my submission form on my website. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to help support you. If you're interested in a group dynamic to do that, I will be offering another round of the program I offer for women lawyers, for leaders. That'll be starting in January of next year. So you can send me a note. I'll make sure that you have all the information that you need. That is a wonderful way to do this work with a group of women lawyers. And also, if you have lawyers that you want to support. So I work with law firms where there are leadership programs for women lawyers or for senior lawyers who are approaching partnership level or who are partners who want a little bit of extra support. If this is something that you'd like to support your lawyers with, by all means, reach out. I would love to talk to you about what that could look like and the things that I can do to help your lawyers become more effective leaders. So with that, I'm going to wrap up for the day. And thank you again for joining me here today. It's been such a pleasure having you, and I wish you a beautiful week. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.